I want you to watch this video in its entirety. If you go to YouTube, write this down and look up a title. It's called The Case for a Creator. The Case for a Creator. It's by Lee Strobel, S-T-R-O-B-E-L, S-T-R-O-B-E-L. And this is going to be an assignment for each of us to watch over the next week. I will encourage you, if you want to go a little bit further in depth on this study, to get his book. It is of the same title, author Lee Strobel. Somebody said if it's an hour long, that's called a movie or at least a documentary of some sort, right? And so I do want to encourage you though to watch this. If you want, you can order the book and read it. It is an easy read, but a very, very profound book. Allow me to give you a little bit of a story that you'll learn when reading about this man. Lee Strobel and his wife were atheists. For those who are watching from Chicago, he was an investigative legal journalist for the Chicago Tribune, trained at Yale. And he said that when he was in his science class and he learned about evolution, it was then that he believed that if evolution is true, there was no need for God. So he grew up an atheist. He married a woman who was also an atheist. This woman, through some life events, started going to church. She accepted Christ, and these little incremental changes in her life were really bothering Lee. He said, if you read some stuff about him and listen to some of his videos, he said, our marriage was on the way to divorce court. We don't believe this stuff. Tell the story in one of his documentaries or one of his stories that he was, I believe it was West Virginia, doing a story about some Christians who were protesting evolution being taught in schools several decades ago. And he was like, who still believes this crap of Jesus and God? And so he watched a documentary on evolution. And he said the whole time he's watching this documentary, he's like, yeah, look at this. The science proves it. Why do people still believe that stuff? And he said not long after that documentary, though, he came across an article signed by, I think, somewhere nearly 100 scientists that said, we don't all believe evolution. We don't all believe the theory. Not all of us as scientists believe the theory. He said that was the first time he'd ever heard that there was a scientific disagreement on evolution. Up to that time, he thought that the scientists were all in agreement that evolution was true. So the investigative journalist that he was, he began to look up these scientists who had signed this document. Surely they're not really good scientists. They're not the top of the line scientists. These are probably some people, not very respected in the scientific community. But then he began to look them up, and some of them were Harvard trained, Yale trained, Oxford trained scientists, Nobel Prize finalists. So he's like, wait a minute, maybe there's some truth to this, because he's doing this, he said, because he was on a quest once and for all to prove to his wife that while you might be going to that church and they're talking to you about Christ and you say your life is changing and you're attributing it to God, that stuff's not true. He said, I was on a quest to once and for all prove that God did not exist. He says, and what happened was in my quest to prove he did not exist, I actually found God. And so the book, The Case for a Creator, there's another one, The Case for Christ. There's another one, The Case for Faith. He's got a whole series of books that he's written since then, because this once atheist is now a true believer in Christ. And what I like about this book and what you'll find in this video, that he finds Christ and he finds God in the very place that he thought disproved him, and that's in science. So the thing that has always intrigued me for years now that I've started reading these and studying this and talking to people about it, every parent who's called me that their children is struggling, I give them this video and I let them tell them to watch it and then have their children watch it and then engage a conversation. Because I believe if you allow the science to take you where he allowed the science to take him, it's hard to believe that God does not exist. And so I've been very, very encouraged through this study. Some of you all have heard me mention this before, and I'd always promised I would have this study. We've never done it, but here we are. And I am so excited about it because I believe it is going to arm you when you're having conversations with people who are disproving Christianity and or God and or Christ scientifically. It's going to arm you with a further discussion that will challenge them as they challenge you. I tell people, don't get into arguments or fights in these conversations because that's not how we honor God. But let's have the conversation from a place of knowledge and information. So some of you all know I've done a study on apologetics. Apologetics, APOLOGETICS. Sounds like apologize, but that's not what that means. It's apologetics. It is really a study of understanding who Christ is. And so he would be an apologist in the same sense. It's really a legal term. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this, but allow me as an introduction, I want you to turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 1. Luke chapter 1. I'm going to read verses 1 through 4. It's where we will begin this study. Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. I'm reading from the New King James Version. And this is what it says. It says, "Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed." I wanted to set kind of the parameters for what we know about him prior to his conversion to Christianity. But neither of them were believers. Her life changed. She attributed those changes to God. He's on a quest to disprove him. And in that quest, he finds him. So we're going to be dealing with some issues, biblical issues. I told you, was it Luke 1 through 4? We're going to be there. I've got some notes and things on some things that I've been studying. And I want to talk this first week, I want to talk a little bit about eyewitness evidence to Christ. And we're going to talk about this in stages each week, but we're going to talk today about eyewitness evidence. And I'm going to read something that Lee Strobel said. Lee Strobel said in the book, The Case for Christ, he said, but all I had ever really given the evidence was a cursory look, the evidence of Christ. All I'd ever given the evidence was a cursory look. I had read just enough philosophy and history to find support for my skepticism. A fact here, a scientific theory there, a piety quote, a clever argument. Setting aside my self-interest and prejudices as best I could,
I read books, I interview experts, asked questions, analyzed history, explored archaeology, studied ancient literature, and for the first time in my life, picked apart the Bible verse by verse. And so in this quest, he's picking it all apart, verse by verse. This is the first time he'd ever done it. And so one of the things that we come through when we look at eyewitness evidence is a couple things that I want us to think about. So if we can have confidence, and this is, again, one of the things from Lisa Strobel, if we can have confidence that the Gospels were written by the disciples, Matthew and John, by Mark, who was the companion of the disciple Peter, and by Luke, the historian, who was a companion of Paul, and a first century journalist, that's Luke, we can be assured that the events they recorded are based on either direct or indirect eyewitness testimony. So we know that the disciples were there with Christ. We know that Mark was a companion of Peter and Luke was a companion of Paul. And so the things that we're getting from the writers of the Gospels are either eyewitness testimony that we are either direct or indirect. And what I mean by that is, for example, Mark, who is a companion of Peter, that Mark is writing based on the eyewitness testimony of Peter. And so as a historian and as one who has studied history, if you are writing about something from an eyewitness, that is a first-hand account. If I am an eyewitness and I am writing about what I saw, that is also a first-hand account. Both of which are the most, what's the word I want to say, the most trustworthy testimony that one can give. The most trustworthy testimony that one can give is eyewitness testimony. If you've ever watched a court show or been in court, you will hear discussions that will happen in the courtroom. Someone's on the stand and they're being questioned about an event. And if they are telling you what they saw, they're testifying to something they directly experienced or saw, then there's never an objection. But whenever they say something like, I was told, one of the lawyers will say, I object, because that's hearsay. Because the person sitting on the stand cannot testify to what unless they're saying, what did the other person tell you? They can testify, because now what they're telling you is their first-hand account of what was said. But if they're talking about an event that took place that they were not an eyewitness to, and they begin to talk about what someone else told them, that is now hearsay and not as trustworthy in a court. And so first-hand accounts, eyewitness testimony, is the most trustworthy accounts of anything